The autumn air in New York's Greenwood Cemetery carried a crisp chill, rustling the golden-brown leaves scattered along the stone pathways. Alexander Carter stepped out of his sleek black Cadillac, adjusting the cuffs of his custom-made suit. He was a man of wealth and power, the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar tech firm, yet as he walked through the cemetery past rows of old tombstones, he felt none of the authority that defined him in the corporate world. Today marked the 5th anniversary of his wife Evelyn's passing, and every year he made this lonely pilgrimage to honor the woman he had loved more than anything. No board meetings, no mergers, no deadlines, just silence and the overwhelming grief that never seemed to fade. As he approached her grave, his polished shoes crunching against the gravel, he noticed something unusual. A small boy sat beside Evelyn's headstone, his tiny arms wrapped around his knees. He couldn't have been more than 6 or 7, dressed in a thin, faded jacket despite the biting cold. His brown hair was tousled, and his face, pale and innocent, bore an expression of deep sorrow. Alexander's brows furrowed. It was rare to see strangers near his wife's grave. He had made sure of it. Who was this boy, and why did he look as if he belonged there? Clearing his throat, Alexander spoke, his voice carrying the weight of curiosity and authority. "Hey kid, are you lost?" The boy looked up, his large tear-filled eyes locking onto Alexander's with an intensity that made him pause. There was something oddly familiar about those eyes, something that sent a strange unease crawling up his spine. The boy shook his head slowly. "No," he whispered. "I came to see my mom." For a moment Alexander thought he had misheard. His heart pounded against his ribs and a cold, creeping sensation settled in his chest. "You're what?" he asked, his voice unsteady. The boy hesitated before pointing to the name engraved on the marble headstone. Evelyn Carter. The world seemed to tilt. Alexander felt his breath hitch, his mind racing in a desperate attempt to make sense of what he had just heard. His wife had never been pregnant, at least not to his knowledge. They had talked about having children, but life had gotten in the way. The long work hours, the stress, the silent sacrifices they had both made. And then, before they could ever make it happen, she was gone, taken in a tragic accident that had left Alexander shattered. Yet here stood a child claiming to be her son. His hands clenched into fists, his pulse roaring in his ears. He knelt beside the boy, his usually composed demeanor cracking at the edges. "What did you say?" His voice was quieter this time, almost afraid of the answer. The boy sniffled, wiping his nose with his sleeve. "She was my mom," he repeated. "She used to visit me, before she went away." A chill raced down Alexander's spine. His mind screamed that this was impossible. If Evelyn had a child before they met, wouldn't she have told him? And if she had given birth to this boy after their marriage, why had she never said a word? He studied the child more closely. The resemblance was undeniable, the same soft brown eyes, the delicate features that mirrored Evelyn's. It was as if he was looking at a piece of her that had somehow remained in this world, hidden from him until now. Swallowing hard, he forced himself to stay calm. "What's your name, kid?" he asked. "Liam," the boy answered softly. The name meant nothing to Alexander. His mind was a whirlwind of emotions, shock, confusion, and an overwhelming sense of betrayal. If this child was telling the truth, it meant that Evelyn had kept a life-altering secret from him. But why? And how? His wife had been the one person he had trusted completely, the only one who had ever seen the man beneath the polished billionaire exterior. She wouldn't have hidden something like this, unless she had a reason. Alexander exhaled sharply, running a hand through his dark hair. "Where do you live, Liam?" The boy hesitated again, his fingers tracing the edge of Evelyn's tombstone. "At the shelter," he finally admitted. "In Brooklyn. They take care of me there." Alexander felt his chest tighten. A child? Evelyn's child? Living in a shelter? The very thought made his stomach churn. How could this have happened? Why wasn't he with family? Where was his father? A sudden thought hit him like a freight train. "Who told you Evelyn was your mother?" Liam glanced up, his expression filled with innocence and sadness. "Miss Joan at the shelter. She said my mommy left me there when I was a baby. That she loved me but couldn't keep me. She used to visit sometimes, but then she stopped coming. Miss Joan said she went to heaven." His small voice trembled on the last word, and Alexander felt something inside him crack. Evelyn had been visiting this boy? He had spent years grieving her loss, believing he had known everything about her. And yet, there had been an entire part of her life he had never even suspected. A secret child, abandoned at a shelter. What had been so terrible, so impossible, that she had chosen to keep this from him? His mind raced with questions, but there were no immediate answers. Only the cold wind, the scent of autumn, and the little boy sitting beside his wife's grave, his son, if what Liam said was true. Alexander rubbed his temples, feeling an unfamiliar sense of helplessness wash over him. This wasn't something he could control with money or power. This wasn't a business deal he could negotiate or a crisis he could delegate to his board members. This was personal. This was Evelyn. And somehow, in the middle of it all, was a little boy who had no idea how much he had just turned Alexander's world upside down. For the first time in years, Alexander didn't know what to do. But one thing was certain, he couldn't just walk away. Before going to next, please subscribe our channel, like and share with friends. Alexander stood frozen in place, his breath forming small misty clouds in the cold New York air. The little boy beside his wife's grave, this child named Liam, had just shattered everything he thought he knew about Evelyn. His mind refused to accept the possibility, but the emotions in his chest told a different story. He had built his life on logic, strategy, and careful decision-making, yet here he was, staring into the tear-filled eyes of a child who bore an uncanny resemblance to the woman he had loved. Every fiber of his being wanted to deny it, to walk away and convince himself that this was some mistake, but he couldn't. Something in Liam's face, in the way he clung to the gravestone as if it were his last connection to a mother he barely knew, anchored Alexander to the moment. He swallowed hard and forced himself to speak. "Who else knows about this?" he asked, his voice quieter now, measured. Liam looked down, kicking at the fallen leaves near the headstone. "Just Miss Joan," he murmured. "She told me when I was old enough to understand. She said my mommy loved me but couldn't take care of me. She used to come sometimes, but then she stopped." The boy hesitated before looking up again. "Did she stop because of you?" The question hit Alexander like a punch to the gut. He staggered back slightly, caught off guard by the raw innocence in Liam's voice. His heart pounded as the implications settled in. Had Evelyn kept this child a secret from him out of guilt? Had she feared his reaction? He had never been cruel, but he knew himself. He was a man who valued control, who expected honesty, who never dealt well with unexpected chaos. Had she been afraid that telling him would destroy them? He crouched down, leveling his gaze with Liam's. "I didn't know about you," he said, his voice laced with a mix of regret and disbelief. "If I had, things would have been different." But even as he said the words, he wondered if they were true. Would he have accepted this? Would he have taken in another man's child and raised him as his own? His fingers curled into fists, frustration burning inside him. He needed answers. Real answers. And there was only one place to start. Straightening up, he pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found the number for his private investigator, Daniel Reeves. "I need you to look into something for me," he said the moment the line connected. "A boy named Liam at a shelter in Brooklyn. Find out everything, how he got there, who his biological father is, and if there are any records connecting him to Evelyn." He ended the call before Daniel could ask any questions. Right now, he didn't have the patience for explanations. He turned back to Liam, who was watching him with cautious curiosity. "Come with me," Alexander said, offering his hand. The boy hesitated. "Where?" "Somewhere warm. You shouldn't be out here in this cold." Liam glanced at the headstone one last time before slipping his small hand into Alexander's. It was a simple gesture, yet it sent an unexpected wave of emotion crashing over him. He led the boy to his car, buckled him into the passenger seat, and started driving toward Brooklyn, his mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. The streets of New York passed by in a blur, their usual bustling energy dulled by the weight of the moment. When they reached the shelter, a modest brick building tucked between two towering apartments, Alexander parked and stepped out. Liam followed hesitantly, shoving his hands into his jacket pockets as they walked inside. The air smelled of disinfectant and old books, and the front desk was manned by a tired-looking woman in her 60s. She adjusted her glasses as she noticed Liam. "Back already, sweetheart?" she said kindly, then her gaze shifted to Alexander, her expression turning wary. "And you are?" "Alexander Carter," he said, pulling out his wallet and sliding a business card across the counter. "I need to speak with Miss Joan." The woman hesitated for a moment before nodding and disappearing down a hallway. A few minutes later, a petite, gray-haired woman emerged. She looked at Liam first, giving him a warm smile, then turned to Alexander, her sharp blue eyes studying him. "Mr. Carter," she said, her tone unreadable. "I was wondering when you'd come." Her words sent another shockwave through him. "You knew who I was?" he asked, his voice edged with suspicion. Miss Joan nodded, folding her hands in front of her. Evelyn told me about you, she admitted. She made me promise never to reach out, never to tell you. She wanted to protect both of you. Protect me from what? He demanded, his patience wearing thin. From the truth. The older woman sighed. From the pain, she corrected. Evelyn loved you, Mr. Carter. But she had a past she never could escape from. When she met you, she had already made the hardest decision of her life, giving up Liam so he could have a chance at a better future. She wanted to tell you, but by the time she worked up the courage, she was gone. Alexander felt his stomach twist. He had spent years grieving Evelyn's loss, believing he had known her better than anyone. And yet, there had been a part of her life that had remained hidden from him. He turned to Liam, who was staring at the floor, small shoulders hunched as if bracing for rejection. His heart clenched at the sight. He wasn't sure what he was supposed to feel, anger at Evelyn for keeping this from him? Sorrow for the boy who had grown up without a mother? Or guilt for not knowing sooner? Taking a deep breath, he faced Miss Joan again. What happens to him now? She gave him a measured look. That depends on you, Mr. Carter. He has no family. No legal guardians. He's been here since he was a baby. If you walk away, nothing changes. He stays here, waiting for a home that may never come. But if you decide to be part of his life, that's up to you. Alexander felt the weight of the decision settling over him. He had walked into the cemetery today expecting to leave flowers and grieve in silence. Instead, he had walked out with a child who might be his responsibility. A child who was connected to the woman he had loved more than anything. He looked down at Liam, who still hadn't met his eyes. Slowly, cautiously, he reached out and placed a hand on the boy's small shoulder. Come on, kid, he said quietly. Let's get out of here. Liam finally looked up, his eyes wide with surprise, then hesitant hope. Without a word, he followed Alexander out the door. The billionaire CEO had spent years building an empire, controlling every aspect of his life with precision. But as he walked out of that shelter with Liam at his side, he realized that for the first time in years, he was stepping into the unknown. Before going to next, please subscribe our channel, like and share with friends. Alexander drove through the bustling streets of New York, the weight of the night's revelations pressing heavily on him. The city's bright lights and constant motion felt surreal, as if he had been thrust into someone else's life. He glanced at Liam, who sat quietly in the passenger seat, small hands gripping the edges of his oversized jacket. The boy looked out the window, his face reflecting a mix of exhaustion and uncertainty. Alexander had no idea what to say to him. How was he supposed to comfort a child he had just met, especially when that child's very existence upended everything he thought he knew? His grip on the steering wheel tightened as he exhaled slowly, forcing himself to focus on what needed to be done next. Pulling into the underground parking of his Upper East Side penthouse, he shut off the engine and turned to Liam. Come on, he said, his voice softer than usual. The boy hesitated for a moment before nodding and following him into the private elevator. As the doors closed, the silence between them grew heavier. Alexander had always been comfortable in silence. Negotiations, business meetings, boardrooms filled with high-stakes decisions, but this was different. This wasn't about stocks or mergers. This was about a boy who had lost everything before he even had a chance to understand what having a family meant. When they stepped into the penthouse, Liam's eyes widened, taking in the high ceilings, the floor-to-ceiling windows offering a breathtaking view of Manhattan, and the sleek, minimalist furniture that filled the vast space. It was a home designed for a man who lived efficiently, not for a child. Alexander suddenly realized how cold and impersonal it must seem to Liam. There were no toys, no signs of warmth, no evidence that a family had ever lived here. Because one never had. Clearing his throat, Alexander set his keys down on the marble counter. You hungry? Liam hesitated before nodding. Yeah, a little. Alexander wasn't sure what kids ate. Did he even have anything in his fridge that wasn't expensive wine or pre-prepared gourmet meals? He opened the fridge, scanning the neatly organized shelves before settling on something simple. How about grilled cheese? He offered. Liam's face brightened just a little. Okay. It was such a small thing, but the hint of warmth in the boy's voice made something in Alexander's chest loosen. He wasn't good at this, but he could at least make a sandwich. As he worked in the kitchen, the sizzle of butter on the pan filling the space, Liam wandered toward the living room, his small hands running along the edges of the bookshelves. He stopped in front of a framed photograph on the mantel, one of Evelyn. His fingers hovered over the glass as if afraid to touch it. She was really pretty, he murmured. Alexander swallowed hard. He walked over, standing beside Liam as he looked at the photo of the woman they had both lost. Yeah, he said quietly. She was. The boy turned to him then, searching his face. Did you love her? The question hit Alexander in a way he hadn't expected. Well, it was such a simple word, but it carried so much weight. He had loved Evelyn with everything he had, but now he realized there had been so much about her that he had never known. Did that mean his love had been incomplete? He exhaled slowly. Yeah, I did, he admitted. A lot. Liam nodded, as if that answer satisfied something deep inside him. Miss Jones said she loved me too, he whispered. But she couldn't keep me. His voice wavered slightly, and Alexander felt a tightness in his throat. This kid had spent his whole life wondering why his mother hadn't stayed. And now, standing in a stranger's home, he was probably wondering if he was about to be left behind again. Alexander had never been the nurturing type. He had built walls around himself, preferring control and logic over emotions. But looking at Liam now, he knew one thing for certain. He couldn't walk away. He didn't know what the future held, but he wasn't going to let this boy face it alone. After dinner, Liam sat curled up on the massive leather couch, his small frame nearly swallowed by the plush cushions. Alexander sat in the armchair across from him, sipping a glass of scotch, lost in thought. He had already instructed Daniel to dig deeper into Evelyn's past, to find out everything about Liam's father, if he was still alive, if he posed any kind of threat. But a part of him already knew what the investigator would find. Liam had no one else. Just him. That realization settled heavily in his chest. As the hours passed, Liam's blinks grew slower, his head nodding forward slightly before he jerked himself awake. Alexander watched him, debating whether to send him to one of the guest rooms or let him sleep where he was. Before he could decide, Liam's voice broke the silence. Are you gonna send me back? The question was so quiet, so filled with uncertainty, that Alexander felt it like a knife to the gut. He set his glass down and leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. Do you want to go back? Liam shook his head quickly. No. I don't have anywhere else. Alexander ran a hand through his hair, exhaling slowly. He wasn't ready for this. He wasn't equipped to be a guardian, let alone a father. But this kid had already lost enough. Then you stay, he said firmly. Liam's eyes widened slightly as if he hadn't expected that answer. Really? Alexander nodded. Yeah. We'll figure it out. Liam didn't say anything, but the way his small shoulders relaxed, the way his grip on the blanket loosened, told Alexander everything he needed to know. A few minutes later, Liam was fast asleep, his breathing soft and even. Alexander sat back, staring out the window at the city skyline. His life had always been meticulously planned, every move calculated. And yet, in the span of a single night, everything had changed. He had walked into a cemetery expecting to grieve in solitude and had walked out with a child who might just alter the course of his entire life. He wasn't sure what came next. But for the first time in years he felt something other than emptiness. Before going to next, please subscribe our channel, like and share with friends. Alexander woke up to the faint sound of movement in his penthouse. For a moment, he lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to piece together the events of the previous night. The reality hit him quickly. Liam was here. He wasn't alone anymore. Pushing back the covers, he ran a hand over his face, trying to shake off the exhaustion. His life had never been quiet, but this kind of noise, the presence of another person in his space, was something entirely new. As he stepped out into the living room, he found Liam standing by the massive glass windows, staring at the city skyline. The boy was still wrapped in the blanket from the night before, his small frame looking even smaller against the backdrop of towering buildings and the morning sky tinged with soft hues of orange and pink. Liam turned when he heard Alexander's footsteps, his eyes flickering with uncertainty. I didn't know if I should wake you up, he said quietly. Alexander waved a hand dismissively. You're fine. He glanced at the clock, 6:30 a.m. Too early for someone like him who had long since abandoned early mornings in favor of late-night meetings and even later nights drowning himself in work. But something about this morning felt different. There was no business to rush to, no urgent calls demanding his attention. Just a kid standing in his penthouse, looking like he wasn't sure if he belonged there. You hungry? Alexander asked, heading toward the kitchen. Liam hesitated before nodding. Yeah. Alexander wasn't much of a cook, but he figured breakfast should be simple enough. He found some eggs in the fridge and cracked them into a pan, the sizzle filling the silence between them. You ever been to school? He asked, keeping his voice casual. Liam shifted in his seat at the counter, playing with the edge of the blanket. A little. Miss Joan tried to homeschool me, but she had too many kids to take care of. Alexander nodded, unsurprised. The foster system was stretched thin and kids like Liam often fell through the cracks. He wasn't sure how he felt about enrolling Liam in a school yet. His life was anything but normal, and he had no idea how to give the boy that kind of stability. But he knew one thing: the kid deserved a real shot at something better. As they ate, Liam was quiet but not entirely withdrawn. He watched Alexander closely as if still trying to figure him out. Alexander wasn't sure what the boy saw when he looked at him. A stranger? A lifeline? Someone temporary? The idea of being anything permanent in someone's life unsettled him. He had never been good at relationships, at commitment, at anything that required emotional vulnerability. But as he watched Liam push his scrambled eggs around his plate, he knew he had already made a silent commitment, one he couldn't back out of now. The rest of the morning passed in a blur. Alexander had called Daniel, instructing him to gather everything they could find about Liam's background. His birth certificate, any medical records, anything that would help him understand what exactly had happened to this kid before he showed up at Evelyn's grave. The more he knew, the better prepared he would be. But the question he hadn't yet answered was what he intended to do with that information. Was he planning to adopt Liam? Become his legal guardian? Or was he just keeping him here until he figured out a better solution? He didn't have the answers, and for someone who had built his life on always knowing the next move, that was unsettling. By noon he had made another decision. Liam needed new clothes. The oversized jacket he had been wearing since the cemetery was clearly not his, and everything about his appearance screamed neglect. Alexander wasn't sure how to shop for a kid, but he knew someone who did. After a quick phone call, he found himself sitting in the back seat of his car with Liam beside him, on their way to Fifth Avenue, where his assistant, Rebecca, was waiting. She was efficient, sharp, and the only person who could handle Alexander's unpredictable demands without missing a beat. She had worked for him for years, but even she looked surprised when she saw him step out of the car with a child in tow. "You didn't tell me you had a kid," she said, raising an eyebrow. Alexander shot her a look. "I don't." Liam stood close to him, clearly unsure of Rebecca's presence. She softened when she looked at him, crouching slightly. "Hey there, I'm Rebecca. What's your name?" Liam hesitated before answering. "Liam?" She smiled. "Nice to meet you, Liam. Let's get you some cool clothes, okay?" The shopping trip was smoother than Alexander expected, mostly because Rebecca took charge. She had an eye for detail and a way of making Liam feel comfortable. He watched as Liam slowly started to relax, picking out things he liked, even smiling once or twice. It was strange seeing the boy come to life in a way that hadn't been there the night before. When they were done, Liam had a new wardrobe, and Alexander had the creeping realization that he was settling into something that felt dangerously close to responsibility. That night after dinner, Liam sat on the couch flipping through a book Rebecca had bought him, his feet curled beneath him. Alexander sat across from him, a glass of whiskey in hand, watching the city lights flicker outside. "Do you ever get scared?" Liam asked suddenly, not looking up from his book. The question caught Alexander off guard. He was a man who had faced ruthless boardroom battles, financial collapses, and personal losses. Fear wasn't something he acknowledged, at least not out loud. "Sometimes," he admitted after a long pause. Liam nodded as if he understood. "Me too." Alexander wasn't sure why that admission hit him the way it did. Maybe because Liam had every right to be scared. He had lost his mother, had no father, and was now living with a stranger in a world he didn't understand. And yet he was here, adapting, surviving. There was something in that quiet resilience that struck Alexander in a way he hadn't expected. As the night wore on, Liam's eyes grew heavy, his head slowly drooping against the couch cushion. Alexander watched him for a moment before getting up and grabbing the blanket from the other end of the couch, draping it over the boy. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing: Liam wasn't going anywhere. Before going to next, please subscribe our channel, like and share with friends. Alexander had always believed that life operated best when it followed a structured plan. He built his empire on discipline, control, and calculated risks. But nothing about his current situation fit within any of those principles. A week had passed since he had found Liam at Evelyn's grave, and each day had been an adjustment. The boy was quieter now, as if settling into his new reality but still not fully convinced it was permanent. Alexander, too, was grappling with the changes. His penthouse, once a place of silence and efficiency, now had small but undeniable signs of a child's presence. An extra plate at breakfast, books left on the coffee table, and the faint sound of a television playing cartoons in the morning. He wasn't sure how he felt about any of it. That morning, Alexander sat in his office at Manhattan Towers, staring at the financial reports on his desk, but his mind was elsewhere. Daniel had gathered more details on Liam's past, and the file now sat in front of him, waiting to be opened. He took a deep breath before flipping through the pages. The first thing he saw was Liam's birth certificate. His mother's name, Evelyn Carter, was listed. The father's name, however, was blank. Alexander had expected that, but seeing it in black and white unsettled him more than he anticipated. He turned the page, scanning through the case reports from Child Services. Liam had been in and out of multiple foster homes after Evelyn's death. The reports mentioned neglect, unstable environments, and the boy running away several times. His last known placement had been with a woman named Joan Mitchell, who ran an overcrowded foster home in Brooklyn. But there was nothing in the file that explained why Liam had been at Evelyn's grave that night. There was no mention of any legal guardian bringing him there, no indication that anyone had been looking for him. Alexander closed the file and exhaled slowly. The more he learned about Liam's past, the clearer it became that this boy had been alone for far too long. The thought unsettled him. He had never considered himself the paternal type, never imagined being responsible for someone else's life. But now that Liam was here, Alexander couldn't ignore the growing sense of responsibility gnawing at him. That evening, Alexander arrived home earlier than usual. He found Liam in the living room, sitting on the floor with his new books spread around him. The sight was almost surreal. He had seen children in passing before, at charity events, at the homes of business associates, but never like this, never as part of his own world. "How was your day?" Alexander asked, loosening his tie as he stepped inside. Liam looked up, seemingly surprised by the question. "Good," he said hesitantly. Alexander nodded and sat on the couch. "What are you reading?" Liam hesitated before holding up one of the books. It was a collection of classic stories, something Rebecca had picked out for him. "Do you like them?" Alexander asked. Liam shrugged. "I guess. Some are kind of sad." Alexander leaned back, thinking about that. Stories had always fascinated him, not because of their plots but because of what they revealed about people. Every story had a lesson, a hidden truth buried beneath its words. "Sad stories can be important," he said. "They teach us things we wouldn't learn otherwise." Liam nodded, looking thoughtful. "Did you ever read sad stories when you were a kid?" The question caught Alexander off guard. He had read, of course, but nothing like what Liam was reading. His childhood had been shaped by business magazines and financial reports long before he had any real use for them. "Not really," he admitted. Liam didn't push for more. Instead, he set the book aside and picked up another, flipping through the pages absent-mindedly. For a while, neither of them spoke. The quiet was comfortable, almost natural. Alexander found himself studying the boy, noting the way he had already started to look healthier with regular meals and sleep. He still had the cautious air of someone who wasn't used to trusting easily, but there were moments, like now, when he seemed to let his guard down just a little. "I found some information about your past today," Alexander finally said. Liam tensed slightly, his fingers gripping the edges of the book. "Oh." Alexander hesitated before continuing. "Your mother never listed a father on your birth certificate." He watched Liam's reaction carefully. The boy swallowed hard but said nothing. Alexander waited, giving him time to process. Finally, Liam spoke, his voice quiet. "She never talked about him." Alexander nodded, expecting that answer. "Do you ever think about looking for him?" Liam shook his head quickly. "No. If he wanted me, he would have been here, right?" The simplicity of the statement hit Alexander harder than he expected. He wasn't sure what to say to that, so he simply nodded. Liam's logic was heartbreaking in its honesty. Later that night, after Liam had gone to bed, Alexander stood by the window, staring out at the city below. His mind was restless. He had spent his entire life making decisions based on logic and profit, weighing risks against rewards. But this wasn't business. This was something else entirely. He could walk away, find a better home for Liam, let someone else take responsibility. But the thought of sending Liam away left a bitter taste in his mouth. His phone buzzed, pulling him from his thoughts. It was Daniel. "I found something else," Daniel said without preamble. There was a record sealed in one of the older databases. Evelyn Carter filed a request for paternity testing when Liam was an infant. The request was never followed up on, but the name she listed as the potential father. Daniel hesitated. It was Mark Donovan. Alexander froze. The name was one he recognized instantly. Mark Donovan was a name whispered in boardrooms and splashed across business headlines. A billionaire investor, ruthless in his dealings, a man known for his cutthroat strategies and his ability to destroy companies overnight. Alexander had worked with him before, had even considered him a rival in certain circles. The idea that Liam could be his son was almost unbelievable. But if it was true, "Are you sure?" Alexander asked. 100%, Daniel replied. "The records are there." Evelyn must have suspected but never got the chance to confirm it legally. Alexander let out a slow breath, his mind racing. If Mark Donovan was Liam's father, that changed everything. And Alexander had no doubt that if Donovan found out, he wouldn't take it lightly. The man was as controlling as he was powerful. If he wanted Liam, he would take him, whether Liam wanted that or not. Alexander's grip tightened around his phone. He had spent years playing power games in the business world, but this was different. This wasn't about money or deals. This was about a child who had already lost too much. And Alexander wasn't about to let someone like Mark Donovan take away what little stability Liam had just started to find. Before going to next, please subscribe our channel, like and share with friends. Alexander barely slept that night. The revelation that Mark Donovan might be Liam's father had set his mind spinning in ways he hadn't anticipated. He had dealt with ruthless businessmen before, men who would do anything to get what they wanted. But this wasn't a business deal, it was a child's life. And he wasn't about to let Mark Donovan swoop in and take control just because he had the power to do so. By morning, Alexander had made his decision. He needed to confirm the truth, but more importantly, he needed to figure out what to do if Mark really was Liam's father. He couldn't risk the boy being thrown into another storm of uncertainty. At breakfast, Liam sat quietly at the table, poking at his eggs with his fork. He had been more withdrawn since their conversation the night before, his usual guarded expression back in place. Alexander watched him, feeling a strange sense of protectiveness grow stronger. "How do you feel about visiting the park today?" he asked. Liam glanced up, his brows furrowing. "The park?" Alexander nodded. "Central Park. Thought you might like to go out for a while." Liam hesitated before giving a small shrug. "Okay, I guess." It wasn't enthusiasm, but it was something. They arrived at Central Park later that morning, the autumn air crisp but not too cold. The park was alive with joggers, families, and street musicians filling the air with melody. Liam walked beside Alexander, his hands stuffed in the pockets of his jacket, his eyes darting around as if he still wasn't sure if he belonged here. Alexander had seen that look before, in business associates who felt out of place in his world. But with Liam it was different. It wasn't just uncertainty, it was the deep-seated belief that he was always one step away from being left behind again. After a while they found a bench near a pond, and Liam sat down watching a group of kids feed the ducks. Alexander sat beside him, unsure how to start the conversation he knew they needed to have. "You said your mom never talked about your father?" he began. Liam tensed but nodded. "What if she tried to find him?" Liam turned to him, his eyes wary. "What do you mean?" Alexander chose his words carefully. "What if she had doubts about who he was and tried to confirm it?" Liam frowned, processing the idea. "I don't know," he admitted. "She never said anything. She worked a lot. She didn't talk about stuff like that." He looked away, his voice quieter. "I think she was afraid of something." Alexander felt a familiar unease settle in his chest. If Evelyn had been afraid, it wasn't without reason. And if Mark Donovan was the father, that fear might have been justified. "If you had a chance to find out for sure, would you want to?" he asked. Liam hesitated before giving a small shrug. "I don't know. I guess it doesn't matter. He's not here, right?" Alexander exhaled slowly. The boy had been abandoned in so many ways that he had learned not to hope. It was a painful realization. "What if he did know about you?" Alexander asked carefully. "What if he found out now?" Liam stiffened. "I don't want him to," he said quickly. "I don't care if he's some rich guy or whatever. He wasn't there when my mom needed him, so why would I need him now?" The conviction in Liam's voice was sharp, and Alexander felt something settle in his chest. The boy didn't need another powerful man treating him like an obligation. He needed stability. He needed someone who wouldn't disappear. And Alexander realized with startling clarity that he didn't want to hand Liam over to anyone, not even if Mark Donovan turned out to be his biological father. He wasn't sure when the shift had happened, but the idea of letting Liam go felt wrong in a way that nothing in his structured life ever had before. That evening, Alexander met with Daniel in his office, the weight of his decision pressing on him. "We need a paternity test," Alexander said without preamble. Daniel, ever the professional, simply nodded. "I can arrange it discreetly," he said. "But if Donovan gets wind of it, he'll come looking." Alexander clenched his jaw. Then we make sure he doesn't find out, at least not yet. Daniel studied him for a moment. You've already decided, haven't you? He asked. Even if he's the father, you're not giving Liam up. Alexander exhaled, rubbing a hand over his face. The kid has been through enough, he admitted. I'm not going to let some billionaire with a god complex walk in and claim him like a business acquisition. Daniel smirked. That's a hell of a stance, considering you're a billionaire with a god complex. Alexander shot him a look, but Daniel only chuckled. All right. I'll get the test done quietly. But if Donovan is the father, we need a plan. He doesn't play fair. Alexander already knew that. He had seen firsthand how Mark Donovan operated, buying out companies, forcing people into corners until they had no choice but to surrender. But Liam wasn't a company. He was a child. And Alexander wasn't about to let him be treated like a pawn in someone else's game. 2 days later, Daniel handed him an envelope containing the test results. Alexander opened it with steady hands, his heart pounding harder than he wanted to admit. He scanned the document quickly, and when he reached the conclusion, he exhaled sharply. Mark Donovan was, in fact, Liam's biological father. Alexander sat back in his chair, letting the reality sink in. He had expected it, but seeing the confirmation made it feel more real. Now the question was, what would he do with this information? He had promised himself that he wouldn't let Liam be tossed into uncertainty again. But keeping this from Mark Donovan wouldn't be easy. The man had resources, and if he ever found out, he would demand his rights. For now, Alexander decided he wouldn't say anything. He would protect Liam for as long as he could, keep him safe from the storm that was sure to come. But deep down, he knew it was only a matter of time before Mark Donovan learned the truth. And when that happened, Alexander would have to be ready for a battle unlike any he had fought before. Before going to next, please subscribe our channel, like and share with friends. Alexander knew he was walking on thin ice. Keeping the paternity test results a secret was risky, but he couldn't let Mark Donovan take control of Liam's life. The boy had already endured enough instability, and Alexander wasn't going to let another powerful man treat him like an asset to be claimed. However, the weight of the truth pressed on him daily, and he knew it was only a matter of time before something forced his hand. Liam had begun to settle into his new life, though he still carried an air of caution. He wasn't used to the idea of permanence, and Alexander understood why. The boy had been abandoned in more ways than one, and trust wasn't something that came easily to him. But there were moments, small, fleeting moments, when Alexander saw glimpses of the child Liam could have been if life had been kinder to him. Like when they visited a bookstore in Midtown, and Liam's eyes lit up at the shelves stacked high with stories. Or when they took a walk along the Hudson River, and Liam, for the first time, asked Alexander a question about his childhood. These moments told Alexander that, despite everything, Liam still had hope buried somewhere deep inside him. One evening, Alexander returned home to find Liam sitting at the dining table with an open book in front of him. The boy wasn't reading, though. He was staring at the pages as if lost in thought. Something on your mind? Alexander asked as he set down his briefcase. Liam hesitated before nodding. I was thinking about my mom, he admitted quietly. Alexander pulled out a chair and sat across from him. What about her? Liam traced a finger along the edge of the book. She worked a lot. I didn't always understand why she was so tired all the time, but now I do. She was trying to make sure we were okay. But I think she was sad too. Alexander felt a pang of sympathy. Evelyn had done her best, but she had carried burdens no one should have to bear alone. She loved you, Alexander said. That much is clear. Liam nodded but didn't look up. Do you think she knew who my dad was? The question made Alexander pause. Liam had never asked so directly before. Carefully he chose his words. I think she had her suspicions, he said. But maybe she wasn't sure if he would be the kind of father you deserved. Liam looked up then, his eyes sharp with understanding. So he's a bad guy? Alexander exhaled. Not necessarily. But he's powerful. And sometimes, powerful people don't make the best decisions when it comes to family. Liam studied him for a moment. Do you know who he is? Alexander's chest tightened. This was the moment he had been dreading. Liam, you do, Liam interrupted, his voice barely above a whisper. You know, and you didn't tell me. Alexander leaned forward, his voice firm but calm. I was trying to protect you. I needed to be sure before I said anything. Liam's hands clenched into fists. Who is he? Alexander hesitated, but he knew he couldn't lie. Mark Donovan. The name meant nothing to Liam at first. He frowned, trying to place it. Then realization dawned and his face darkened. The The billionaire? The one on TV all the time? Alexander nodded. Liam's expression twisted with anger and disbelief. He knew about me and didn't care? Alexander shook his head. He doesn't know yet. Your mother never told him, and I only found out recently. Liam stood up so abruptly that his chair scraped against the floor. So what happens now? Are you gonna tell him? The anger in his voice wasn't just directed at Mark Donovan, it was directed at Alexander too. And that hurt more than he wanted to admit. Not unless you want me to, Alexander said evenly. This is your life, Liam. You have a say in what happens next. Liam paced the room, his emotions warring within him. What if he finds out anyway? What if he tries to take me away? His voice cracked slightly, betraying his fear beneath the anger. Alexander stood and placed a steady hand on the boy's shoulder. I won't let that happen, he said. No one is taking you anywhere unless you want to go. Liam searched his face, looking for any sign of deception. Finding none, he exhaled shakily and nodded. That night, as Alexander lay in bed, he knew things had changed. The truth was out and there was no going back. Liam had a father, a powerful one. And sooner or later, Mark Donovan would find out. When that day came, Alexander would be ready. He had promised Liam that he wouldn't let anyone take him away. And he intended to keep that promise no matter what it took. Before going to next, please subscribe our channel, like and share with friends. Alexander knew the peace wouldn't last. The moment Liam learned about his father's identity, a silent countdown had begun. Mark Donovan wasn't the type of man who stayed in the dark for long, and Alexander had no illusions that the billionaire wouldn't eventually uncover the truth. The question was, when he did, what would he do about it? For now, Liam remained quiet about it. He wasn't sure how to process the fact that his father was one of the most influential men in New York. But Alexander noticed the subtle changes in the boy's demeanor. He was more restless, his gaze drifting off during their conversations, as if his mind was constantly spinning with unanswered questions. And then one evening, those questions finally boiled over. It started with a simple knock on Alexander's office door. He looked up from the pile of reports he had been reviewing and saw Liam standing there, his hands stuffed into the pockets of his hoodie. Can I ask you something? The boy said hesitantly. Alexander put his pen down. Of course. What's on your mind? Liam stepped inside, lingering near the doorway as if he wasn't sure if he truly wanted to say what was on his mind. But then, with a deep breath, he asked, Do you think he would have wanted me? The question hit Alexander harder than he expected. He had seen this coming, of course. But knowing Liam had been carrying this thought inside him still sent a pang of sorrow through him. Liam, Alexander said gently, sometimes people don't know what they have until it's too late. Your mother made a choice to keep you away from him. That doesn't mean you weren't wanted, it just means she was trying to protect you. Liam let out a humorless laugh. So she thought he was dangerous? Not dangerous, Alexander corrected. But he's a man who prioritizes power over relationships. And your mother, she knew you deserved more than that. Liam nodded slowly, though he still seemed troubled. So if he finds out, will he want me now? Alexander sighed, rubbing his temples. I don't know, Liam. But I do know this, you're not just some business asset. You're not a pawn in someone's empire. You are your own person and no one gets to dictate your worth except you. The boy processed those words carefully before finally saying, I don't know if I even want to meet him. Alexander offered a small, reassuring smile. Then you don't have to. That's your choice. But the next day everything changed. Alexander was in a meeting when his assistant rushed in, her face pale with urgency. Sir, she said breathless. There's someone here to see you. He says it's important. Alexander frowned, already sensing trouble. Who is it? Mark Donovan. The name sent a cold shock through Alexander's system. He forced himself to remain composed as he stood. Where is he? In the lobby. Alexander adjusted his suit and made his way downstairs, preparing for the storm that was about to come. When he stepped into the lobby, he spotted Mark Donovan instantly. The billionaire had a commanding presence. His tailored suit sharp, his posture exuding power and control. His icy blue eyes locked onto Alexander's the moment he approached. Alexander, Mark greeted smoothly. We need to talk. Alexander gestured toward a private conference room, leading the billionaire inside. The moment the door shut, Mark wasted no time. I assume you know why I'm here. Alexander met his gaze evenly. I can guess. Mark folded his arms. I don't like being kept in the dark. Especially about something this significant. And what exactly do you consider significant? Alexander asked carefully. Mark's expression hardened. A child. My child. Silence stretched between them, thick with tension. Alexander had expected this confrontation, but now that it was happening, he realized just how much he despised the idea of Mark Donovan asserting any kind of claim over Liam. What do you want, Mark? He asked finally. What do you think? Mark leaned forward slightly. I want to meet my son. Alexander's jaw tightened. He's not just some trophy you get to claim now that you know he exists. Mark's eyes flashed with irritation. I never said he was. But you don't get to make this decision for him either. Alexander exhaled slowly, trying to keep his temper in check. He doesn't even know if he wants to meet you. I promised him he'd have a choice in this, and I intend to keep that promise. Mark studied him for a long moment, then nodded slightly. Fine. I won't force anything. But I want to send him a message. Alexander hesitated, then relented. I'll give it to him. But no pressure, no manipulation. If he doesn't want contact, you back off. Mark smirked. We'll see. Later that evening, Alexander sat with Liam at the dinner table, feeling the weight of what was about to happen. He pulled out the sealed envelope and set it on the table. It's from Mark. Liam stared at it as if it were a ticking bomb. What does it say? I don't know, Alexander admitted. I told him I'd let you decide if you wanted to read it. Liam hesitated for a long time before reaching for the envelope. He opened it carefully, his eyes scanning the letter inside. Alexander watched as Liam's expression shifted, from uncertainty to confusion, then something else. Something unreadable. Finally, Liam set the letter down and looked up. He wants to meet me. His voice was unreadable, but his hands trembled slightly. Alexander kept his tone even. And do you want to meet him? Liam swallowed hard. I don't know, he admitted. But I think I need to. Alexander nodded, his chest tight with unease. He had known this moment would come. He just hadn't expected it to come so soon. Before going to next, please subscribe our channel, like and share with friends. Liam sat in the back seat of Alexander's car, staring out at the skyline of New York City as they approached the restaurant where he was set to meet his father for the first time. His hands were clenched together in his lap, his mind racing with questions he wasn't sure he wanted answers to. What if Mark Donovan wasn't the man he imagined? What if he was cold, indifferent, or worse? What if he wanted nothing more than to erase Liam from his life? The anxiety in his chest tightened as the car slowed down in front of an upscale restaurant in Manhattan. Alexander placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. You don't have to do this, he reminded him softly. Liam swallowed hard and nodded. I know. But I need to. He stepped out of the car, his heart pounding as he walked toward the entrance. The maitre d' immediately led him to a private section of the restaurant, and there, at a table near the window, sat Mark Donovan. The man looked as powerful as he did in the newspapers. Sharp suit, perfectly styled hair, the air of authority that made him stand out in any room. But as Liam approached, he noticed something unexpected. Mark wasn't looking at him with indifference or calculation. His expression was something else entirely. Uncertainty. Maybe even nervousness. Liam, Mark said, standing up as the boy reached the table. I'm glad you came. Liam nodded, sitting down across from him. For a moment there was silence. Then Mark exhaled, leaning forward slightly. I don't expect you to trust me, he admitted. I don't expect you to even like me. But I need you to know, I didn't know about you. If I had... His voice trailed off as if he wasn't sure how to finish the sentence. Liam studied him carefully, trying to decide if he believed him. Why did my mom keep me away from you? He finally asked. Mark's jaw tightened. Because she didn't trust me, he admitted. And I can't blame her for that. I was young, ambitious, and more focused on building an empire than on anything else. But if she had told me, if I had known, he shook his head. I would have done things differently. Liam wasn't sure how to respond to that. A part of him wanted to believe him. Another part wondered if it even mattered anymore. What do you want from me? He asked finally. Mark's gaze softened. Nothing. I just want to know you. The conversation continued, slow and cautious as they talked about small things. Liam's school, his interests, his life with Alexander. Mark listened intently, occasionally asking questions but never pushing too hard. For the first time, Liam realized that this man, his father, was just as uncertain about this meeting as he was. As the evening went on, Mark hesitated before reaching into his pocket and pulling out an envelope. I don't want to overwhelm you, he said, sliding it across the table. But I wanted to give you this. Liam picked it up, looking at him questioningly. What is it? A letter, Mark said. I wrote it the night I found out about you. It's everything I wanted to say but didn't know how. Liam hesitated, then tucked the envelope into his pocket. He wasn't sure when, if ever, he would read it. But for now it felt like enough to know that it existed. As they finished their meal, Mark cleared his throat. I know I can't change the past, he said. But if you ever want to talk, if you ever want to be a part of my life, the door is open. Liam looked at him for a long moment before finally nodding. Okay. It wasn't a promise. It wasn't a commitment. But it was a start. When Liam stepped outside, Alexander was waiting for him by the car. He studied the boy's face carefully. How did it go? Liam exhaled, glancing back toward the restaurant before looking at Alexander. Better than I expected. Alexander smiled, placing a hand on his shoulder. That's all that matters. As they drove home, Liam took the envelope out of his pocket, running his fingers over the edges. He didn't open it yet. But for the first time in his life he felt like maybe, just maybe, he wasn't alone in this world after all. If you've liked this story, please subscribe our channel, like and share with friends.